Before we begin, thank you very much to OMG. I just realized Micron is a portmanteau of Micro and Unicron. Micron Legends was hiding a plot twist right in front of us. For joining the Patreon campaign. Oh boy. The long ones are always interesting. I'm going to throw this out there. I do get a kick out of these really long names, but do me a favor. If you're going to stick around my Patreon campaign, please, once I've given you the shout out, please, shorten that name, because it does make it very difficult to read on my list of patrons, and it makes it very difficult to add to your name to the end credits of the video. If you're one of my top patrons, which this person is. I need something smaller, but I do appreciate the support. Speaking of, this is a Patreon request. Now, we've done topics like this before. We've kind of gone through and picked some new alt modes for some old characters, but I got a request to do something again, specifically characters who need new alt modes. And need is strong, but there's plenty of characters that could definitely use a modification. There's plenty of reasons for that, whether that is to just create a new identity, separate them from other existing characters, or, just something that would sell better as a toy. There's plenty of reasons why you need to upgrade some characters once in a while. It'll never overtake their original alt modes, but for a brand new series or something, it is not a bad direction. It's not a bad thing to keep in mind. So I've come up with a list. Some of it's going to be familiar because, like I said, this is a topic we've broached a few times in different formats. But for today, we're just going to have fun and pick a few new vehicle modes for a few classics. And we're going to start somewhere that is very familiar if you've followed this channel in the recent weeks. Skywarp. Now, we've talked about him and all the weirdness that comes from Skywarp, and how when the Seeker trio is made, usually Skywarp is the oddball out, having some weird difference that keeps them from being a perfect match trio. What I did not discuss is how you solve this problem, because I did an entire video of this once upon a time where we talked about how to actually do a modern set of Seekers, because the problem is, when you're doing the original 3 Seekers, it's already difficult to put all 3 in the show at one time because it makes it hard to tell them apart to kids. Earthspark gets away with that because 2 of them are female and are very distinctly different colors from each other, and a very different body from Starscream. Looking similar, but all 3 are different from each other. And that is something I think you could expand upon even more by switching out the alt modes. So Skywarp, I think a stealth bomber. I would love this vehicle to have an identity as the alt mode of this popular Transformers character. This is, again, I've mentioned this in the past, this is just one of those alt modes that no one has really gone for. This is not an alt mode that one particular character is known for. And I feel like it's overdue because it's such a cool and unique vehicle. I think it's so overdue to just have a Transformer take it as their identity. And I think Skywarp is a really good choice. The idea here is that even though the Seekers would have different alt modes, they would transform into similar looking robot modes. So you would still have all 3 be very distinct from each other on a toy shelf, but also still feel like they are a matched trio. So that also brings us to Thundercracker. And I would love. It's hard to do him justice. So first off, if I'm going with the teleporting idea for Skywarp, that's why a stealth vehicle makes sense to me. Something, especially a high-speed stealth vehicle. However, when we're talking about Thundercracker, who's known for sonic booms, I'm looking for a supersonic fighter. But I'm also looking for something with a very unique design. Originally, I thought maybe a Warthog, but that's Powerglide, and I don't want to step on Powerglide's toes. So I started looking for some more unusual fighter designs, some unusual jets that he could be, and I stumbled into the F-104 Starfighter. It is supersonic. It helps that this one's already blue. And it's just an extremely different look from what my image of Starscream and Skywarp would be. Skywarp gets to be the stealth bomber. Starscream could be either the classic F-15, or he could take on a modern one, the 22 or the 35, if you want to like spice him up. But the idea would be that at the end of the day, all three would have a robot mode that does look kind of similar to each other. Thundercracker taking this alt mode would definitely be the thinnest of the batch, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Again, giving them a little bit of difference between each other is only going to improve the ability to use all three at the same time. So I think that is a very strong thing. Also, we do keep in mind that if we eventually do the cone heads as well within the same series, that would just be a remold of each individual one. So you have room to grow. You have things you can do. I really, really like that. I really like that. So again, it's a way of making all the Seekers distinct and getting them all out at the same time, which I think would be really, really cool. As long as we're in jets, let's move into the Season 3 cast, because most Season 3 characters have actually gotten modern Earth modes. Most of them at this point have been seen on Earth in one way or another. Even RC now has her choice between like a sports car or even like an old school roadster. But we have never picked an Earth mode for Cyclonus. Now we know he has to keep his identity when he gets into alt mode, so it's got to be a reverse wing setup. So the wing's got to be pointed forward at the very least, and it's got to be something very high speed, very maneuverable. Something along those lines. And I stumbled into the Grumman X-29. Now, this was an experimental craft. Ultimately was not practical, so I don't think this has ever been put into any practical use. But they're toying with the idea of this reverse wing design, with the idea that it would be that the way it handled drag would be faster and would make the overall vehicle more maneuverable. That was more or less true, but the design lacked the ability to be as maneuverable as they really wanted. This is a robot. This is a robot pilot. This is a super highly advanced robot piloting this. I think he would do a better job. My key thing with Cyclonus is to make him as maneuverable as possible in alt mode. Theoretically, this is the way to go. Not that a human pilot could ever replicate that. The design isn't quite fleshed out for that. But no, this one does come close. I mean, it definitely keeps his identity. It is a very sleek vehicle. The reverse wing, obviously. I think this would work. I think this would work. I think this suits Cyclonus. One of the others from the 86 cast who's never had a proper Earth mode is Wheelie. Now, granted, he does have the GDO figure that's just a repaint of Jazz, but that doesn't really feel like it captures Wheelie all that properly. So I need something different. I want it to be small-ish, though that's hard to do for a car that has to turn into a robot. But I definitely want it to be fast, and I wanted it to be very rounded. I want to keep some kind of image of how his normal alt mode works. So once again, like the Stealth Bomber, I turned to a Transformer vehicle style that gets used once in a blue moon, and it's a distinct vehicle, but again, it never really seems to have anybody who has it as their personal identity, and that is a Dome Racer. This one is particularly the 2008 Dome, but there's many different models that they could have gone with for this. And I think this suits Wheelie pretty good. Like, even if you look at how his chest shape is designed in his robot mode, even the front end of this looks like it could replicate that pretty well. Yeah, it just works for me. It's round. It's got the dome look to it. I mean, you're never gonna go wrong on a race car. This works perfectly for me. I wish I could, I should have photoshopped this thing to be like two-tone orange to really strike that. But again, it's one of those vehicles that I think is super cool, but no Transformer is really the Dome Racer Transformer, right? So I feel like this is a niche that needs to be filled. Let's get into ones that aren't just oh well, okay, so we've done jets. We've done the jets, and we've done we've done a few 86 cast members. Let's move into people whose alt modes really aren't practical in any way, shape, or form. So we need to do something a little bit more up to date to kind of suit them. And Perceptor is the one that comes to mind first. Yeah, a toy microscope a kid is not going to be interested in at the toy aisle these days. You're just never going to get a kid to be interested in this. So if you're going to do Perceptor, especially if you're going to do Perceptor in a brand new fiction, you got to find something brand new for him. Well, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of scientific research vehicles to choose from that aren't just SUVs with a radar dish on top, or like a storm chaser vehicle. That doesn't really seem like it suits Perceptor. So we got to go concept. We have to go very different. And fortunately, there's one that's already been a Transformer toy. So this, Toyota's Lunar Cruiser. So obviously this was already done as Optimus Prime, and obviously this is just a concept vehicle, so it doesn't actually exist. But, and also, of course, it doesn't make sense to see on a road on Earth. However, it is a vehicle solely designed for gathering scientific information, scanning its locations, basically being an all-in-one laboratory for learning about, whatever is in the location. So, I feel like that is a spot-on choice for Perceptor. I feel like that suits him perfectly. Again, does it make sense to see on Earth? No. It's a lunar vehicle. Of course you don't see it on Earth. That said, I can't deny this. There's no other choice for Perceptor that makes sense for me. This is just ideally him. You even have the thing on the side that could actually be the replacement for his scope. This just works. Here's another one. I would never change his alt mode. Let's make this clear. I would never change his alt mode. But that said, Cosmos was dated when he started. So he is a UFO straight out of like a 1950s movie where they're using pie plates to make their spaceships as props. Of course, he's supposed to be like a spacefaring vehicle. There's not a whole lot of small personal spacefaring vehicles that would actually suit this man. There really aren't. So we do have to pick some. I want to pick an Earth mode for him, and I want to keep his body identity correct. So I want to keep him kind of cute, but still still flight worthy. And that's when I come across this. This is the Dyke Delta. So you know what a kit car is, right? So it's just basically here's a here's the outer shell of a car. This is like a hobby car you have to build yourself kind of thing. This is a kit plane. Okay? There's a handful that are actually out there in the United States. It's extremely unique design, obviously. It's a very cute little tiny plane, which I think is absolutely adorable. And this feels like it would be a perfect fit for a modern Cosmos. Is it space-worthy? No. Does it kind of look like a flying UFO? Absolutely. I would love this. I don't even care if it's Cosmos. I just kind of want this cutesy little plane as a Transformer. I want this to turn into a robot for me. So yeah, Cosmos is a tough one. Cosmos is a really tough one. Granted, you could just make him a modern spaceship or a space shuttle. It'd be way bigger than he normally is, but you could do that. You could make him a satellite and have the same function. But I feel like this gets his personality across a little bit more. So maybe maybe this is just when he's tired of flying around space and he just kind of wants to be a little bit closer to Earth, as it were. Here's when you don't think of. This poor boy needs an entire makeover, entire personality, just an entire redo from the ground up. Hubcap. I genuinely don't know what they were thinking. They already have the confusion of the Bumble Jumper, with from Generation 1, as well as the fact that you could just find Bumblebee and Cliff Jumper in each other's colors from time to time. But then they decided in year 3, let's just do a yellow cliff jumper. And we're basically just going to make him like, what, Bumblebee's offbeat cousin? Like, Hubcap is unfortunate. Like, he's never going, like, we've gotten one modern Hubcap figure, and it basically just is just, you know, it is exactly what you think it is. It's just the cliff jumper mold in yellow, new head, and it looks basically like a weird Bumblebee. In fact, they did that mold as Bumblebee, and the two are nearly identical. So, Hubcap, despite being an 86 character, is one of those that's never going to get used again unless we do something brand new with him. And I took inspiration from the name Hubcap, because that puts me in the mindset of he needs to be something a little bit more old school. Because hubcaps are kind of an outdated thing when it comes to cars. So, when I go to that, I start to think like old school roadster, like old school hot rod type vehicle. I understand I have chosen a vehicle that also does not use hubcaps, not the point. The idea here is just based on identity. Of like, if the name Hubcap is going to put me in the mind of an old school car, then it needs to be an old school car he turns into. And one of these feels perfect for him. It keeps the rounded, cutesy shape of the G1 Minibot that he is emulating. It still would turn into a relatively small character. You could keep the robot mode looking fairly similar. And yes, this is kind of a take on his 2010 movie-style toy that really does feel like it suits the name Hubcap. I really, really like that toy. And to have a new take on it based on the G1 character, I don't think would be a bad idea. I would absolutely do this. This would absolutely be my Hubcap, and I'd be way more into him than I am now. Alright, here's one that's always vexed me, because he's one of my favorites from the original G1, but you never see him used anymore. We got him in Siege, and that's literally it. Reflector, because this one is problematic. Now, because of collectors, you can get someone to buy a toy tape player, because, you know, the sound wave gimmick is just so cool. That's always going to be a toy that sells. But when it comes to Reflector, you're not going to get a kid to buy a toy camera that doesn't work, right? So you're already in trouble there. So I need to pick something different for him. I need to pick something where he can gather information, because that's what his role is. He's an information gatherer. He's basically the Decepticon version of the Scout that Bumblebee is. So I need something that can roam around without anyone really paying any mind to it. You know, something, you know, that can gather as much info as possible. And then splits into 3 separate robots. And I think I have my solution, and I think I finally get my bus transformer. In particular, yes, I've chosen a segmented bus here, an articulated bus that has 3 segments. This is something that I absolutely feel that you could make a 3-robot transformer out of, since all 3 boxes are relatively the same. They could all transform very similar to each other to form 3 identical robots. And this just makes sense to me. You just imagine, like, if this kind of vehicle, like, even if it's not an articulated bus, but just a bus in general, the Reflector is driving around in a major city, a Los Angeles, a New York, a Washington, D.C., where he just feels like one of the other tour buses that are roaming around the city. But he's picking up every radio and Wi-Fi signal that is going on throughout this major city in order to gather intel. And then, if he's also picking up humans, every single one of them talking out loud, punching things into their phone, their 5G going through Reflector, and you know, you're talking, what, over 1,000 people a day if this is an active bus. Look, you know, you're dealing with like terabytes of data a day that this guy would be gathering. You know, that makes for a perfect spy, in my opinion. Not to mention, fleets of buses are a thing. So if you need him to be just a troop builder or a generic soldier, oh, you got plenty. You can have plenty of these guys rocking up. Also, if they're all segmented like this, you just keep stacking them, keep stacking them. Now you have a Reflector of like 15 buses all trained together. I think it'd be great for a toy. I think it'd be hilarious as a toy. Let's wrap up with some of the ones you have to include when you talk ones like this. We've talked about alt modes for these characters in the past. We're going to go over it again. I think I picked a little bit of a different solution to them. We start with Shockwave. Now, of course, this is again back to the you can't do a gun today. Obviously, Shockwave being a bright purple character makes it a little bit more skewed, but Hasbro really doesn't want to risk it. Also, here's the thing. Gun laws are constantly changing when it comes to what they can and cannot release as a toy. So Hasbro does not want to release a figure of Shockwave, even if they got away with like bright orange and purple Shockwave as a toy that turns into a gun. They don't want to risk that, well, now you can't make it purple. Purple's too dark of a color. You need to make it like bright blue or bright red. And to go to that length, since the rules are constantly changing, they don't want to produce a toy that, next year someone might say, nope, you can't release that anymore, and then they can't get their money out of that toy anymore. So they're just better off to just completely ignore it. With Shockwave, I feel like the 07 movie had the right idea of making him some kind of attack helicopter. But I went with more of a stealth approach. This is an RAH-66 Comanche, which is a super cool looking helicopter. I think it fits Shockwave character-wise a little bit better, just with the overall sleekness and more high-tech look of it. Now, this is a vehicle that only 2 prototypes exist and never went into full production. That said, Transformers has used concept vehicles before for their alt modes, so I don't think this is off the table. Would it be weird to see one flying around? Absolutely, because they're not supposed to be. But it is a super cool looking vehicle. I think it suits Shockwave's overall look. I think it suits his attitude a little bit. So, I think that works. And then, of course, that leads us to the one who always needs a new alt mode, which is Megatron, of course. Megatron just gets to be a tank these days, and I think a tank he will stay because it is a vehicle equivalent of a gun. That said, tanks are so overdone. Tanks are so overdone. I don't think the leader of the Decepticons would allow himself to have an alt mode that not only do 2 of his soldiers use, but one of his enemies also uses as well, if we are accounting for Brawl, Blitzwing, and Warpath, on top of all the other tanks that have come since then. It's a cool looking alt mode. I just think it's overdone. I don't think Megatron would want to share it. Something more unique. Something more design-wise. I was thinking something like a missile truck, but I don't want that gigantic missile pack that's on the back of those trucks to just be like a big chunk thing on the character. So I just went with as big and powerful as I could find. And that is when we come to the M1126 Striker, which is, again, something that we've seen a few versions of. So, like, Universe 2 Onslaught was something similar to this vehicle. And it is a really cool looking vehicle. It is, one of the fastest, big, heavy iron, big, heavy, like, armored vehicles that you could possibly send troops in with. You could potentially arm it with some additional firepower on top, your big cannon turret, or, like a big rocket or something that would become the fusion cannon in robot mode. But I feel like it has to be something like this big and powerful to actually be appropriate for a Megatron, right? I don't think he's just going to be just like a little tiny vehicle. He's going to be huge. And this thing is absolutely huge. So, maybe, like, there's other versions, there's other vehicles like this that use tank treads instead. Maybe that would be a little bit more of like a closer approximation. But for what it is, I really like this for Megatron. So I'm going to stick with that. And that's going to be the end. We've gone well over 20 minutes at this point, so I think good to cut it off there. Like I said, like, this is something you could do a million times over, and I could have, even if I'm picking the same characters, I could have different answers. So this might be something we do more of. I might, like, whittle it down to, like, a specific group. Like, what do we do with, like, an Earth mode for Technobots? We can do things like that one day. But for now, that's the list. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.